maybe this hype is justified. Certainly it's justified at certain positions, and it's been a long time since anybody was talking about the Eagles having one of the best receiving groups in this league.
Absolutely. And, for me, when you think about it in a vacuum, right? Like you said, like from a position group basis, the Philadelphia Eagles can actually compete with most of these and most of these teams. Like you said, the wide receiver group, you have an AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins is up and coming. But even outside of the wide receiver room, I believe the list also included tight ends as well.
Welcome in Monday morning Birds 365 show. Welcome, Birds 365 block. Don't adjust your screens. That's not Jody McDonald. That is my buddy Tone DeShields, the typical producer of this show, stepping in for Jody Mack. Now, we have to say this, Tone, right off the bat, because everybody's going to say Jody didn't wake up because Jody didn't wake up for one show over our first 300 or so shows. I think we're at 295. He's not, he is up. So you don't have to worry about Jody oversleeping, but he is having some technical issues. So we're going to be
Unfortunately.
working on that. Maybe he comes in, maybe he doesn't. But I'm thrilled to have you, Tone. Welcome to the program. Obviously, behind the scenes, Tone does all the heavy lifting, but he does his own podcast, so he's used to this kind of stuff. And I want to introduce him to all the listeners. Welcome, Tone, to Birds 365.
Hey John, thanks for having me. It's interesting because I used to watch this show regularly before I became a JAKIB Sports team member, right? And you said this is episode 295 for you guys. I think this is episode one for me. So yeah, first time for everything, and looking forward to this opportunity because there's so much really to get into when it comes to the Eagles. I know it's the off season, especially that brief that weird limbo window between OTAs and training camp, and that's the time where we have to become our most creative as not just beat reporters like yourself, but content creators like myself as well.
Yeah, and I think, I'd like to joke this is list season, Tone. You've heard Jody and I say that. We got a couple more lists we're going to talk about the Eagles. And it's interesting because from Philadelphia's perspective, the expectations of this team, it's been sort of one of the themes in the offseason. It continues. Pro Football Focus has the Eagles wide receivers, top five. I think number four, I have to double check, but
Yep,
top
number 4,
five
you're right.
group. And the 33rd team, which are our buddy Paul Domowitz writes for, Joe Banner, Mike Tannenbaum, they did their top offensive line list. I took a look at that at JAKIB Sports, so people can read that. But the Eagles, no surprise to anyone, are a tier one offensive line um, with three other teams. So when you talk about a 32 team league and you're in top five at these positions, that's pretty good. So maybe as we get towards this off season and we continue to move towards training camp, which starts July 26th, I believe, is the reporting date. Um, maybe this hype is justified. Certainly it's justified at certain positions, and it's been a long time since anybody was talking about the Eagles having one of the best receiving groups in this league.
Absolutely. And for me, when you think about it in a vacuum, right? Like you said, like from a position group basis, the Philadelphia Eagles can actually compete with most of these and most of these teams. Like you said, the wide receiver group, you have an AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins is up and coming. But even outside of the wide receiver room, I believe the list also included tight ends as well. And when you think about what Dallas Goddard brings to the table, you can't help but to think highly of what this team can do, especially just AJ Brown's presence alone creates mismatches for the opponent because even if he doesn't have a catch in the game, he's going to demand so much attention on the other side of that field which is then going to make life easier for Devontae Smith. And then Quez Watkins can easily run up the seams, split the cover two, and go deep. Or then you have Dallas Goedert who can catch balls across the middle. This team has become very versatile in their wide receiver room, and I believe that's been the theme of this offseason is versatility. Versatility. What do you think?
Yeah, I do. I mean, well, number one, I think when you talk to this coaching staff, particularly at certain positions, certainly offensive, defensive line, you always talk about Jeff Stoutland, Jonathan Gannon. These guys want versatile players, and they want guys to be able to play different positions. Now, there's certain, obviously, there are certain positions where you're not looking for versatility. Wide receiver, you can talk about moving in and out from X to Z to flex and being able to line up. And I know coaches like to pay lip service to that, but look, there's certain guys like AJ Brown, you don't want him in the slot. You want to take advantage of his big body and his ability to get outside the numbers. And for that matter, Quez Watkins, maybe the only issue you look at in that top three receiving group, Tone, is okay, where does Quez fit? Because he's really an outside receiver. He
Right.
he can run by everybody, but he's probably best suited for this team to go in the slot if he can do it, simply because Devontae Smith, who can do it, do you really want to waste him as a slot receiver too much? It's okay if you do it every once in a while, but you want him outside the numbers as well. And in theory, on paper, you want AJ and Devontae to be the flanker and the split end, and you want somebody, whether that's Quez Watkins or maybe it's going to be Zach Pascal. To be honest, I think people don't talk about that enough as the main slot receiver. And Nick Sirianni's always going to talk about, we want to move these guys around. We want to have them each in every position. And maybe that turns out to be exactly that, because at some point you just, I guess, want to let talent go. So, this has always been one of my biggest concerns, really dating back to when Doug Peterson was still here, Tone, and the fact that not only has this team's inability to find a receiver been troubling, the fact that they haven't been able to do it in this era is really troubling, because let's face it, this is the offensive era of football. This is the passing era of football. Everybody's got receivers. It's easy to find receivers. So if you look around the NFL, the Eagles haven't had 1,000-yard receiver since Jeremy Maclin in 2014. 2014. That is unbelievable. Other than the Jets are the other outlier. Brandon Marshall, 2015. They also had Eric Decker. They had two in 2015. Everybody else, it's 2019 at worst, 2020, 2021. You get the Giants, who are a terrible team. You got to go back to 2018. I'm looking at my list here. The OBJ. So they have to go back to 2018. Every other team, it's 2019 at worst, 2020 or 2021. The Eagles have to go back to 2014.
What I mean,
to have a 1,000-yard receiver.
That speaks to the malpractice at the GM position at times, And look, I'm really big on giving Howie Roseman credit when he deserves it, and I'm also really big on letting him have it. And this is with all due respect. There have just been times where Howie Roseman has overthought the role as GM when it came to evaluating the wide receiver position. Perfect example, and the most recent example, is the Jalen Reagor and Justin Jefferson, debacle. And I'm one of those people who used to be very critical of Jalen Reagor, and I've come to a point where I'm starting to, I guess, ease up on him, because at this point we know what we know, and I think it'd be a bit unjust and unfair for me to continue to criticize him, especially knowing the way the team is built now. He's, by the war of attrition and by circumstance, he has dropped down the depth chart. And like you said, we've gone since 2014 without having a 1,000-yard wide receiver, and we came this close with Devontae Smith, this close. But again, you think about like you said, this is the time of the list, and the Eagles were ranked fourth with their receiving core: AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins, Dallas Goedert. They even mentioned Rager on the list. I'm surprised. I thought they probably would have mentioned Zach Pascal. So that threw me for a loop. But in a vacuum, yes, this Philadelphia Eagles has top 5 groups. But when you think about it outside of the vacuum, can this team put it together? And you can have a top flight receiving core as much as you would like, but do you have someone who can get them the ball on a regular basis? I'm of the mindset of I want Jalen Hurts to succeed, because if he does succeed, this puts this team in a much better position in the long run. But if he doesn't succeed, we have to be okay with that, and we have to be willing to move on as a fan base, and just in general. But I want to get your thoughts on something, since we're talking about lists. We mentioned the receivers, we mentioned the offensive line. We know our offensive line is top flight for the past several years. But I have a question for you. There's a list I compiled and I've been thinking about since yesterday. Who in your mind are your top 5 most important Eagles entering the 2022 season?
That's it. Well, number one is easy, and that's the quarterback, and it's always the quarterback. That's everywhere. But most important, obviously, it's arguably the most important position in all of sports, I guess. If you're a baseball fan, starting pitcher on a particular day, maybe in the conversation as far as most important player, but that's once every 5 days. Your quarterback. And as we're talking about those receivers, look, we now know, as people have said, Pro Football Focus. Okay, we know, and Nick Sirianni has said this as well, Tone. There's no projection with AJ Brown. Typically, you're projecting with young players like Jordan Davis, a first-round pick. Tremendous upside, but right, it's still a projection. We have to see it. There's no projection with AJ Brown. You've already seen it. You know what he is. You know he can produce in this league. Same thing with Devontae Smith. A little bit more projection because he's a young player, but
Right.
you saw how good he was as a rookie player. So now, I always say receivers are at the mercy. They need a vehicle to get them the football. They can't do it themselves. Now you can do a manufactured touch, you can do an end around, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
For them to do their job, they need a vehicle to get them the football. Can Jalen Hurts be that consistent vehicle to get AJ Brown and Devontae Smith the football consistently? That to me is the number one issue with the Philadelphia Eagles. Number one, not issue, but thing we have to answer. So when you talk about most important, number one is easy. Then it starts to get cloudy. Okay, who's more valuable? Who's less valuable? One, I'm going to say off the bat, that's probably going to open some eyes is Jordan Davis. And I want
Wow,
to
we're
talk.
on the same page here, John. Not
Yeah,
to cut you off, but I had
yeah,
Jalen Hurts number 1. I had Jordan Davis number 2.
yeah.
And the reason for that is because Jordan Davis is the key to Jonathan Gannon's vehicle.
Yes, he is. And I don't
If
think people realize it.
they
And I
don't,
wrote about this at JAKIBSports.com. People can check that out at JAKIBSports.com. People are looking at the Eagles defense, and they always talk about Jonathan Gannon, and they look at Mike Zimmer, understandably so, Matt Eberflus, understandably so. He's not going to run that defense. He doesn't want to run that defense. He wants to run Vic Fangio's defense, which is, by the way, over 30% of the league wants to run Vic Fangio's defense. And when Vic has decided to take this year off, and when he comes back next year, if nobody wants to hire him to be a head coach, he's going to set up the biggest bidding war in the history of coordinators in this league. But people say, what's the connection? The connection is Brandon Staley. for people that don't know, Brandon Staley was an outside linebackers coach under Vic Fangio, and Sean McVay hired Brandon Staley. Now, what's the connection there for people that don't know? Brandon Staley and Jonathan Gannon are best friends. They've known each other since they were 10 years old playing AAU basketball in the Cleveland area.
Wow.
They were in each other's wedding. That's how close they are. Jonathan Gannon helped Brandon Staley get his first coordinator job in college at John Carroll. They are peas in a pod, and they believe the same thing with defensive football. Now, we're not going to have time. We're going to get into this later in the show before our first break, but just real quick, and we'll dive deeper into it later, Tone. But Sean McVay, the first time he went to the Super Bowl, which is his second year as a head coach, he was destroying this league till he hit Vic Fangio. And Vic Fangio kind of shut him down. The Patriots copied the plan. The rest is history in the Super Bowl. They held the Rams to 3 points. Sean McVay specifically went to Brandon Staley and said, run Vic Fangio's defense. And that's how that happened. So that's where Jonathan Gannon wants to go. That's why you need anybody who watches Vic. They play this sort of hybrid 3-4-4-3. Could be a 5-man front. Could be a 6-man front. That's what they did to stop the Rams back in the day. They used a 6-man front. Versatility is something we've talked about, and we'll get into this later in the program because I do want to get into your list of the most important players on the Eagles. But I see Ed Kratz has jumped into the green room, so I want to jump to our first break after the fresh from Niagara Falls, by the way. Ed Kratz will join Birds 365.